When conducting planning and operations, it is critical to understand the importance of communicating to all audiences. There will be a message received, and ensuring that this message is the intended message should be a deliberate activity. This is accomplished through constructing a mission narrative. The concept of a mission narrative, to tell a story, is a relatively new concept in doctrine, although the term and definitions have been evolving over the past few years. The concept of mission narrative is distinct from the commander's intent. The commander's intent focuses on internal actions of the force and addresses the components of what and so what with key task, end state, and purpose. The commander's intent guides subordinates in knowing what they have to do, key task, why they are doing it, purpose, what success looks like, end state, and how actions fit into the larger plan, linkage. The mission narrative instead focuses on the external audiences, emphasizing the payoff from their perspective. The mission narrative addresses the components of which means, and therefore focusing on perceptions, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors of external audiences. Subordinates' actions are guided by the mission narrative, just as they are guided by the commander's intent. But the mission narrative is intended to look at how key actions and their payoffs are perceived in the shoes of external audiences observing those actions. Army and Joint Doctrine are constantly being revised to incorporate lessons from current operations. And the doctrine for the concept of the mission narrative is no exception. The draft doctrinal publications have broadened the approach to discuss narrative construction, instead of just describing the mission narrative as a component of the design concept. In a broad sense, a narrative is a story constructed to give meaning to things and events. Individuals, groups, organizations, and countries all have narratives with many components that reflect and reveal how they define themselves. Political parties, social organizations, and government institutions, for example, all have stories bound chronologically and spatially. They incorporate symbols, historical events, artifacts, tied together with the logic that explains their reason for being. To narrate is to engage in a production of a story, an explanation of an event or phenomenon by proposing a question or questions in relation to the artifacts themselves. These questions may include, what is the meaning of what I see? Where does the story begin and end? What happened, is happening, and why? Narrative construction, the conscious bounding of events and artifacts in time and space, is central to framing. Commanders, staffs, and unified action partners construct a narrative to help understand and explain the operational environment, the problem, and the solutions. Not only is the narrative useful in communicating to others, the act of constructing the narrative itself is a key learning event for the command. By constructing a narrative, a commander is providing insight into his focus, the frame, as well as his operational approach to a problem. This narrative is complementary to the commander's intent and is told as a story that provides insight into the conditions and the environment, the opportunities that exist, the approach to the problem, and finally, and most importantly to most stakeholders, the potential payoffs for actions. The mission narrative is a single narrative statement made by the commander that articulates conditions, opportunities, key actions, and potential payoffs associated with a particular mission. At the campaign level, the mission narrative is described as the campaign narrative. The mission narrative is developed to provide a common azimuth to communicate effectively and accurately to external audiences whose perceptions, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors are relevant to the unit's mission. Mission narratives should be developed from a collaborative effort that truthfully and accurately reflects what the mission itself is likely to communicate to those external audiences. Since any mission success is largely dependent on the story it communicates, mission narratives should be analyzed as part of the evaluation process when comparing specific courses of action. Developing a mission narrative should be an essential component of mission command and planning, drawn heavily on collaboration and dialogue, as well as the insight that is developed from the interaction between the environmental frame and the problem frame that results in the operational approach. The mission narrative should also be unclassified to enable all stakeholders, including the public, to gain insight into the operation. The mission narrative should consist of a series of statements of 150 words or less that can be communicated in no more than 1 minute. The start point for a mission narrative should be a statement of the current conditions, informed by the commander's understanding of the environment and easily understood by listeners. Based on these conditions, there should be a statement of the opportunities that are presented by the environment that permit change and transformation for better conditions, the desired end state. In response to these opportunities, there will be a number of key actions that will be observed by external audiences. These actions will result in different payoffs. For some audiences, the payoffs will be positive. For others, primarily adversaries, the payoffs will be negative. The payoffs will result in a new set of conditions, the transformed environment, the desired end state. The key component in the mission narrative, the important part of the story, is in communicating the payoff for external audiences. Bottom line, a narrative is a story constructed to give meaning to things and events. Narrative construction, the conscious bounding of events and artifacts in time and space, is central to framing. By constructing a narrative, a commander is providing insight into his focus, the frame, as well as his operational approach to a problem. The narrative is complementary to the commander's intent and is told in a narrative or story that provides insight into the conditions in the environment, the opportunities that exist, the approach to the problem, and finally, and most importantly, to most stakeholders, the potential payoffs for actions. I'll conclude with a quote from Major General retired Robert H. Scales. Today's challenge is to develop another generation of soldiers, equally skilled in the narrative arts. Skill at feeding the narrative is no longer a contributor to achieving strategic success in a regular war. It is, in fact, the principal determinant and the psychological center of gravity for shaping the perceptions and influencing the will of the population. The area of operations concept has given way to a narrative stream defined by the global media. While the narrative stream is neutral, who occupies and who exploits it is not. In the end, ground truth or actual battlefield conditions will prevail. In this new American era of warfare, however, the art of feeding the operational narrative requires skill and maneuvering across expansive human perception rather than an expanse of territory. Thank you.